at 6:07. Apologize for the delay. First on the agenda, the roll call. Mr. Fournier?
Here.
Mr. Punchak?
Here.
Mr. Porter?
Here.
Mr. Keane?
Here.
Mr. Menard?
Here.
And the chair is here, full house. Next on the agenda, we're going to review the, do we have the minutes for?
No, it says it will happen from the next meeting?
Oh, will be reviewed on June 9th, sorry about that. An important disclosure. Any planning board members have any potential conflicts with the matters before the board this evening? None. Disclosure and notice. Any planning board members need to disclose any ex parte communications about any contested or material adjudicatory facts or opinions concerning the merits of any application before the board this evening? No. Okay. Declaration of voting members, since we have a full house, it's Mr. Fournier, Mr. Punchak, Mr. Porter, Mr. Keane, and myself. And I thought we'd closed the informational meeting.
I think so. They close information.
Yeah,
Yes.
which, I mean, it still allows us to discuss, it just means no public input.
Yes, they
Well, we do have an individual here that actually addressed the board's concerns relative to.
But he's part of your project team.
Yes, right.
Right.
Not the public.
He's part of the applicant's team, yep. So, okay. Okay, so, the sole item on the agenda this evening, major land development project, Pomham Solar, locations 850 Iron Mine Hill Road, Assessor's Plat 16, Assessor's Lots 18 and 19, applicant Islander Solar, LLC. Just want to give us a recap of where we are, Mr. Gurley?
As you're aware, this matter has been continued from originally the April 14th meeting, then to the May 12th meeting, and then there was a site visit, I believe, last Thursday on site, and continued to the meeting this evening. I think that the applicant made their presentation at two of the meetings, but basically finished most of their presentation at the last meeting. There was a discussion back and forth. They had their engineer and a representative of the company here to answer questions of the board, and I think it was continued to this evening to accommodate the site visit.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yep, and I did want to just take a moment to thank the board members for the extra time for the site visit last Thursday, and also for this extra meeting to move the project along more quickly. So with that, we'll look to the board. We had raised a number of concerns, and I'll refer back to, because what we're getting to is we have to determine our vote. There we go. Can't do that without glasses. Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
before we get into some semantics, for those of us who aren't able to attend the site visit, would the folks that did attend be able to kind of give a
Sure.
quick
Okay.
summary of what was seen and observed?
Yeah, good point. Yeah, it was a little damp, but nothing that kept us away. We entered via the driveway of the property that's providing the easement for the access road, and proceeded from there down onto what I guess would be part of the access road, right? Part of what we started on would be part, and then we went to the west, I guess, or to the south to see we chose one of the areas. We were looking on the map, looking at the terrain, one of the areas with the various drainage that would be constructed. They pointed out the stakes that were marking the fence line versus stakes that are marking property line. And after we did that, we kind of circled around and picked up where the utility building would be, and the beginning of the connection to National Grid, and then came back that way. And again, noting the terrain itself was fairly flat, where the array itself will be. Some significant rocks, definitely, the glaciers definitely made a path through that land at one point, judging by the carvings and the big rocks there. But again, no blasting is being proposed. So, and one of the things I clarified when we got to an area where the land does drop off is that when they're cutting back to allow for the angle of the sun, this is on the south side, that they will take into account the downward slope, and therefore not have to cut trees based on if it was flat terrain. So you can leave trees closer, et cetera, because they won't be in way. So, and I forgot the engineer sits on, there's a certain software they use, I guess, to help take into account those contours so that they can have less impact on the environment. So I know there was some, Mr. Keene and Mr. Punchak, when you chime in, I know there was some lengthy discussion around where the property line was, abutting the neighbor that was there. So.
There was discussion about where the property line actually was, but it didn't seem to me to be a major. I think in the end, everybody pretty much agreed that it was pretty accurate.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think, I got the impression that the first meeting that neighbor came to, he mentioned, there's all these stakes and all these flags and all these different colors, and wasn't understanding what it all meant. I think that he has a better understanding, and I don't think that he was objecting to it, after realizing. I think he was concerned about the proximity of the area in the northeast corner being cleared closer than anything else, but it's being done to potentially benefit him by being able to put some evergreen plantings there. So I got the impression that he was a little more at ease with it, so.
Yeah. And I will say the one thing that I noticed that it's a younger forest than some of the sites we've been on. The very, very few trees more than a foot in diameter. And they're thin enough that the place was just a carpet of blueberry bushes. So there was enough filtered light getting through for them to grow. So that means not long ago it was cleared land, right? Probably 50, 75 years, something like that. So, and I think that's about it. Is there anything you'd like to add from your observations? Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. So with that, we'll kind of pick up on the conversation, but I would like it, I'm going to be uncharacteristically structured this evening, okay? So to make sure we follow along the right way. We have our 5 categories of information we need to cover, and the first one being, and I'm just going to read directly from Rhode Island General Law 4523-60, which is the procedure that we're following now on covering the required findings. So, item 1, the proposed development is consistent with the comprehensive community plan and/or has satisfactorily addressed the issues where there may be inconsistencies. So, Mr. Porter, you had brought up a number of things you felt. Mr. Carullo had brought up one for which the project is consistent. But did you want to go there? We have that. We took that list and handed it out to you guys.
Yeah. Excuse me while I work around my partner here.
Mr. Chairman, would you like to share the list with the applicant? Or-
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought I had. We took what was said and put it into a written document.
Yeah. So, as Mr. Chairman has said, the goals in the comp plan that was not, in review of the comprehensive plan, Mark had found one item that this project was consistent with. Going through the rest of the comp plan, I had found that this project was inconsistent with these items as outlined, and the reasoning behind it as well. So while I agree it does, promote environmental sustainability, but at this point, it's our balancing act really with the comp plan. And at this time, I had felt that it just, while it checks one box, it does not check all these other boxes that we're trying to do, to accommodate. So, again, this is just a further outline of what was said at the last meeting.
What we would need for those items that you mentioned is kind of factual information about this project specifically that supports the inconsistency, that supports identifying an inconsistency. So do we have that?
Yeah, with the items in italics, that kind of explains the inconsistencies with our comp plan. With the natural resources chapter goal 2, with the solar photovoltaic, and, excuse me a minute, sir, your ride is here.
Well, that's a zoning.
Zoning is the second page. The
Yeah,
first
okay.
page is,
Well, I'm just saying, in the italics, I say, it says, the subject property is zoned residential, so the fact that it, the fact that it goes against a zoning ordinance is a zoning topic. Now, obviously, we have a say, we can recommend things to the zoning board, but I just, it's not our jurisdiction to,
Sure.
right? But it is our job to point it out.
yes. Sorry for that interruption.
You just lost your expert.
I know.
Sorry.
Here's my expert witness. So, I understand that, we do have zoning items, but, with the land use and the natural resources, those were two of my concerns that were with preventing incompatible non-residential uses. We're seeing solar as a commercial piece. It's not residential in any way, shape, or form. So that's another piece there. And then the Natural Resources Act, Goal 1, Action 1A, Policy 4D, Open Space and Rec, Action 2A, 1 on that. We talk about we talked about this the last time as well, the uninterrupted forest with the RI DEM designated unfragmented core forest. And that's straight out of our comp plan as well. It's identified in the maps, it's right there. So, again, this is just, putting down what I had felt was inconsistent with the comp plan at the time of submission.
So I have a question on one, because on the policy 4D, it says with emphasis on areas actively in farm, forest, and open space. That's a designation that the owner of the property has to get, is it not?
Not only that, it would also be reflected in.
Before you go, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, Edward Pimentel, for the record, that's Pimentel. So I'm an urban planner. I was engaged by council.
Ed, excuse me?
Yep.
If he's going to testify, you should get up to the
Yeah,
microphone
it
so
would be
that they
better
can.
if you could get on.
I'm sorry, Ed, but
That's
just
right.
so we can get it on the record.
So I guess some of these questions and concerns were raised at the last hearing or two,
Yes.
and I do apologize.
We had it via email, yep.
So I do apologize, I kind of dropped a verbose report on you last minute. I just got recently engaged. So I am a big proponent of solar.
Is your microphone on? Now
Okay.
it's on.
So I am a big proponent of solar. I've probably done over 3 dozen solar projects across the state, primarily in rural communities, from very large, 60 megawatts, 300 acres solar projects, to very small ones, 3/4 of a megawatt. The solar project in question, from my experience, is probably on the smaller, moderately sized, and that's because the efficiency in the panels. When I first started in this industry, it was average 5 to 10 acres per megawatt. Now we're about 2 to 3 acres. That's how efficient. At some point, you're going to reach the peak of efficiency, but that's where we're at. Why I don't believe these are inconsistencies is for the following reason. A comprehensive plan lays out foundationally what the vision for the community is and provides goals and objectives and guidelines and direction, but it's the subsequent regulations that are adopted that then take these goals and objectives and effectuate how we exercise and achieve those goals and objectives. So when we say, under Land Use Chapter Goal 3, prevent incompatible non-residential uses, I think we're somehow including solar in this, but that's not the case, because then you apply this to the zoning code, and what has the legislative body determined? They determine that solar facilities are in fact very appropriate in a residential. That's why they're allowed by special use. I mean, the case law precedent on special use is just insurmountable. They've already determined that when you impose a use conditionally permitted, you've already deemed it to be permissible, subject to reasonable conditions, if it's necessary to make sure it fits in with whatever the unique characteristics of the site. And that's really what it comes down to. We try to locate a solar project, and you try to find the most appropriate site, and then you try to blend it in with the specific unique characteristics of that property. Much like this board did in saying, look, why don't we relocate it further towards Lot 18, which is partner to the application, because it will preclude impacting other portions of the property, right? So we're balancing the act of all this dimensional criteria and locating the solar. And sometimes, just like granting waivers in subdivisions and land developments, sometimes a waiver realizes a better project. So incurring a dimensional variance is going to incur better development. But it goes back to the site characteristics of the property. We know solar is appropriate, but how do we locate it the best? So, because the biggest concern, we always know. We know what the biggest concern of solar is. It's visual screening, right? Nobody really wants to see the solar panels. It's what I always have to deal with every solar project I work in. So we balance that in. We try to find sites that are well forested. We try to locate it such within that mature forest such that we minimize to mitigate to the best extent possible the visual intrusions. And that's really what it comes down to. But to say that a solar is an incompatible, I would have to disagree vehemently, given that this is allowed by special use. So what happens is you take these goals and objectives, and then you start to craft and author your zoning code, your subdivision, your land development regulations, and other specific ordinances. You know, when I was in North Kingstown, we crafted one for Post Road uniquely, one for Wickford. In East Providence, we've crafted unique ordinance for overlay districts. Looking at the bigger picture of what we envision from the comprehensive plan, and then bringing it down to regulation form. So I would have to disagree. I don't believe solar is an incompatible residential use. I don't even think it comes to that. If that were the case, in your zoning code, it would be precluded to be allowed in your residential districts. So that's point A. It's true. Most of the solar is being located in the rural communities because that's where the vast land resources exist. In the urban environments, we're trying to be crafty, right? We put them on rooftops. We're covering parking lots with carports. Dealing with one now, a tennis court. We're taking the entire parking lot, putting a carport over the tennis court. Bank of America just came before us. They've got 3 acres of parking. They want to put a carport to cover it all and do solar to offset their energy needs. So in the urban environments, we're trying to be as crafty as possible. We just don't have the land resources. So where are we going to achieve the objective from the state in this balanced approach to renewable and non-renewable? It ends up being kind of in the more rural communities. Having said that, then the balance act is how do we preserve the rural character and realize introduction of renewable energy sources. And that's where I think it comes down to the play of this. It is a balancing act. We need to preserve. That's why you impose limitations, right? You can only cover a certain percentage of the property. You can only maximize the solar facilities. It can only be of a certain massing and scale, setbacks. You try to preserve as much or the majority of the land resource as possible, and yet realize the provision of solar energy. And that's really what we're trying to accomplish through the regulations. I don't believe solar is at all incompatible. In fact, if you look at all the land uses that could potentially impact an environment, besides true commercial and industrial, residential is one of the greatest impactors. Generates effluent, uses water resources, creates traffic, contributes to the environment, and it's a fiscal. Typically, it's not a fiscal contributor, whereas at least the solar facility is a fiscal contributor and yet doesn't have any of the required infrastructure needed by a true commercial and industrial. That's why commercial industrial is precluded from being located in a residential, and solar is not, because it blends in very well with the residential. It comes down to, like I said before, the visuals, and that's what we try to mitigate.
I would point out, because I did this for another project, is that when this project is run its course, 30 years from now or whatever, the land can still be developed in another way. There's nothing precluded, you know, there's nothing that stops that from happening. So, you know, and making decisions solely about money is generally a bad thing, right? So my point is that you're not stopping this from ever becoming one of the dreaded housing developments with those expensive children. That can just happen, it's just delaying it.
Well, yeah, I've worked on a myriad of developments. Some, we were able to offer more than just the 20 or 30 years. I don't know what the specifics of this development is. What I can say is there is nothing to preclude a property owner from logging a property, from removing all the trees. I had the same conversation and discussion with the zoning board in Burville recently, and they said, you're cutting a lot of trees. And I said, well, that doesn't preclude the applicant from going tomorrow, pulling a RIPD's permit, clear cutting everything, and then coming back to the board and saying, well, guess what? Now we don't have to clear any more trees. I said, that's not a threat. I'm saying that's the way the regulations are authored. At least in this case, in this instance, you're going to end up with almost half the property having to at least be preserved and protected during the life of the soul, right? Because it's strict compliance with the approval of this board, and then subsequently with the approval of the zoning board, and for successful, we have to come back and then design it before this board. So at least from that period, 20, 30 years down the road, who knows what's going to come of all this, right? Maybe there'll be something else. Maybe the land will be able to be preserved. But at least it gives you another 20, 30-year window to try to preserve those forests. We know, at least during the 30 years, 50% of the resources will be preserved. And like I said, we have to try to address our energy needs. Where do we address them? If we're trying to find the most perfect sites, the old gravel bank, right, where everything's already been disturbed, or if we try to find just those perfect sites, we're never going to achieve what we're trying to achieve. Secondarily, though,
There's a lot of parking lots in Rhode Island.
no, there are a lot of parking lots.
There's a lot of them in North Smithfield that could
But
use a
it's
carport.
just, but I can just tell you, those as well, those very expensive to build. So the few that have come before us, like the Bank of Americas, which have the funding, because, yeah, you're right, but most people don't want to spend the money to do the carport because the offsetting cost just isn't quite there yet. So we end up achieving it by using some of the rural acreage. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation, but I don't think it's necessarily incompatible. I don't know if there was any of the other ones you wanted me to address.
Mr. Key?
I just want to reiterate my concerns from the last meeting. And again, I'll go back to the comprehensive plan, Chapter 5, Natural Resources, where it states, forest fragmentation due to residential and urban development is of concern in the state as well as in North Smithfield. Fragmentation occurs when contiguous forest land is divided into smaller patches. The division has the potential to change the local water cycles, reduce critical wildlife habitat, and foster the growth of invasive plant species. In Table 5.3, Goals, Policies, and Actions, Action Item 1A2, protect existing natural environments and mitigate the impacts of proposed development on those environments. This property lies within a lodge, for North Smithfield, a large contiguous forest that extends from Iron Mine Hill Road south to Rocky Hill Road, as you know, and it extends east to the Woonsocket Reservoir number 3 and west to Grange Road. So I understand it's only 22 acres, of which only half is being disturbed, I believe, or roughly half.
13, yep.
So, but it's chipping away at a contiguous forest. As you stated, there's no guarantees that this is going to be preserved 30 years from now. We don't know what's going to happen. So So if we start, if we allow this, I'm concerned that, you know, there'll be others, and eventually that forest is gonna be reduced to nothing.
I can tell the board, the first thing I look to when I get involved in a solar project is to the respective maps as to whether there's a plan in place of a contiguous greenway corridor, and does this, would the solar project interfere with that, right? I know that a lot of communities, they're trying to acquire those pieces to make that continuous greenway corridor. This was not in any of those areas, number one, that there's already been a lot of effort and concentration put on. Does solar result in the removal of some trees? Yeah, in most instances it does. But I say it again, you've got to look part and parcel between when you author your comprehensive plan, part and parcel, eventually the ultimate goal, what do you do through your zoning regulations? If this community really feels that it's inappropriate to have scales of this, because this is not a large-scale solar, but if they are concerned about that, you can either regulate that by outright prohibiting them, or you can regulate them by only allowing a certain percentage, and only deal with smaller scale solar facilities. But as we stand right now, your regulations have determined that this is a conditionally permitted land use in this zone, in this community. So part and parcel with the balancing that with the goals and vision of this community is that there's going to be areas that we preserve in perpetuity for rural. There's going to be areas that have to be developed residentially. There's going to be areas that have to develop commercial and industrial. There's going to be areas that are going to be protected in perpetuity for open space. That is what a balanced plan looks like in a comprehensive plan. It isn't that anything that's zoned residential is going to remain rural, because that is just simply is not the case. People have property rights, and they've got the right to utilize those properties in accordance with your zoning regulations. And this community has determined, first via your comprehensive plan, we want to do our fair share. We believe we need renewable energy, and the primary renewable energy is solar. The whole state of Rhode Island's been mapped for wind. There's very few areas where wind can be introduced economically in a feasible manner. So it really comes down to solar. This community wants to do its fair share pursuant to the enabling legislation. You've actually adopted and incorporated its own element within the comprehensive plan. It's in my report, and I do apologize. I know you haven't had a chance. Staff has already referenced it in their staff report as well. And then your zoning regulations, which then make a determination as to where it should be located, has determined that the RA district is appropriate. That's where we are right now. If the community has a different perspective in the future, I can respect that as well.
I hope you're not insinuating that North Smithfield hasn't done its fair share of supporting
No, I'm saying that North
renewable
Smithfield
energy.
wants to do its fair share is what
Yeah,
I'm saying. They
yeah.
want to. If this North Smithfield didn't want to do its fair share, it could have outright prohibited it. Right?
Right,
You have that
yeah.
right, but you don't want to do that. You want to say,
Yeah.
you know what, renewable energy is an important thing,
Yeah.
right? We need renewable energy. 88% of all the resources in town are zoned residential. 61% of it is zoned RA. If you look at those numbers, and you look at the remaining acreage that's viable for development, and then excluding all those features that are being deemed unsuitable for development, right? All the upland resources. I guarantee you, 90 to 95% of a solar project is going to end up locating in a residential district in an area that's trees. I don't know how else you could avert it.
I would just want to ask, what percentage of forest would a community have to give up in order to achieve its fair share of renewable energy?
But that,
According to you?
no. According to me, I respect the community's rules. If this community says, we've done 10 solar projects, we've introduced 20 megawatts, whatever the numbers, we're talking theoretical numbers.
Right.
And we feel we've done our fair share. I respect that. Say, you know what, from now on, we only want to locate them in disturbed sites. We only want to locate them in commercially zoned properties. Some communities have done that. Hopkinton, right, went way overboard. So many projects there. They amended it. We said, we've done our fair share. We're going to change the regulations. I respect that process. It's a regulatory process. The legislative body has the authority through their zoning regs. You can go into your comp plan, right, and then amend and say, look, we've incorporated 20 megawatts in the last 5 years. We feel that is contributing to the state's game plan. So from now on, we believe that only the following areas, and then accordingly in your zoning regulations, you can amend them to say that's how we're going to handle. That is your right. But as it stands now, this is where we are in the legal, in the regulatory process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else have something? I didn't, yeah, as you know, we got these, we have very
You
little
know, I
time
do
to look at.
apologize, I
But
apologize for that.
I'm very visual, so I always flip through books and look at the pictures.
Yeah.
So, one of the pictures, the future land use map on page 6, makes reference to the overlay district.
Yeah, a large swath across the
And I
street, yeah.
didn't, and I wasn't able to really figure out how the two are related, so if you could,
Can
Clara-
I just approach, because I got to point to something?
Sure.
So in your future land use map, you not only reference the future land use map, and you've referenced the overlay, but then you tie it back to, right here.
Mhm.
I'll
Yeah.
read it.
I'd just like you to clarify that if you
I'll read it
could.
into the record.
Thanks.
Could Gary bring that up on the screen so you could see it?
So the future land use map talks about a large swath,
don't have it, huh?
literally directly across, diagonally across the street from our applicant's property. And so future vision, it talks about potential industrial and commercial. That's number one. But then it also states, lastly, the hatched area within the FLUM, the acronym for the future land use map, reflects the solar voltaic overlay district that now applies to this area. Solar is allowed by special use, but then it goes on in all zoning districts, except the open space. So you already said, we've got protected open space areas, we definitely don't want to be cutting those trees down. So this area diagonally across the street is over, and it's a large swath. In your future land use map, you talk about that being already an anticipated solar overlay district. And you distinguish in your zoning code a solar overlay from the smallest scale solar project that we're proposing, right? Greater than 6 acres, more than 30%, and this is the large swath of land across the street. So I'm saying, already this general area, you've already thought through this and said, this area is appropriate for solar. And when I saw this, I said, you know what, it's just, it just kept making me realize more and more how I could argue, not just general consistency, but specific consistency, and that's why the zoning regulations now were drafted and adopted in the manner they were.
Okay, the confusion I had is it seemed to be implying that their property was part of the overlay district,
No.
which it's not.
No,
Okay, okay.
it's across the street.
Great, okay.
But it was, once again, it was this whole proximity, like, I look for proximity to groundwater, I look to proximity to areas that maybe there's an anticipation, expectation there'll be a continuous greenway corridor. Things that you may say, geez, you know, a special use permit does say conditionally permitted, but is there some unique characteristic of the property that you could say, well, this may be difficult to argue consistency? I didn't find it with this property.
All right. Anything else on the comprehensive plan? Consistencies, inconsistencies? No? Good.
I will be here.
Thank you.
And
Thank
once
you.
again, I know that's a lot of material to go on.
All right, sorry. Where's my phone? Okay, so back to the procedure for required findings. Item 2 on that list is the proposed development is in compliance with the standards and provisions of the municipality zoning ordinance. So, and I know we had a number of, in fact, there's another sheet on that too, right?
Yeah.
The zoning review. Everybody has that? Okay.
So again, as I brought up at the last meeting, we're just further outlining areas of the application that does not comply with the zoning, understanding that that is not our absolute jurisdiction, that's going to be the zoning board's ability to determine, but again, we had gone through an exhaustive process of revising our solar ordinance to make sure that we do have compliance. And, you know, we have had applications in the past where we have also cited the same thing, that those applicants have either, you know, come back and revised in accordance with, and abided by the zoning, or that it just outright has gone by the wayside. So, again, it's just one of those things that we put all these regulations into an effect, and it's just not in compliance with it, so.
Now, does this new document also address the zoning issues?
Yes.
Oh, okay, so, since we haven't had a chance to read it, would you like to cover them? Do you have this, the sheet we just read from?
Perhaps, maybe I need some clarification on the question, because solar is allowed by special use. Solar must proceed through this body by land development. So tying those two together, there is no such thing as a by right? We would always have to go to the zoning board
Right.
to address that number two.
Right.
So,
But it's our job to point out where we see conflict with the ordinance, and then to make a recommendation to the zoning board.
Correct.
So that's all we're.
oh,
looking
okay,
to
okay,
That's what we're looking
yeah.
for
No, I
clarification.
thought the statement was you could never realize consistency without going to the zoning board, I'm sorry.
No.
So what I did was, in the report, I did address the requisite standards, the general requisite standards that are applicable to any use that's allowed by special use. And then there were these specific standards that pertain solely to solar facilities. The vast majority of them are engineering, landscaping, those types of things. The types of things that, honestly, probably the majority of them will probably have to be addressed during the design phase, right? But by Rhode Island general law, the order of precedence is you must first attain master plan approval. You must go to zoning before you can really get into the prelim and start to flush out all the engineering and site design details. And the state did that purposely, because no one would put forth such an investment in a development only to turn around and say, we don't really like the project, go away, right? We would never foresee any development. So generally speaking, and then the general standards, once again, it really came down to two. It's consistency with the comprehensive plan, which I really feel sincerely that we are consistent. And number two, it's neighborhood compatibility. Those are really the two premier standards when you talk about any use that's allowed by special use. And once again, I honestly, sincerely believe that a solar facility is not incompatible. And secondarily, it doesn't rise to the level like a true commercial industrial where you have to meet performance standards, odor, glare, noise, et cetera. Really what it comes down to is the visual intrusion, and given the unique characteristics of this property, relocating it, in fact, as the recommendation of this board, towards Lot 18. Lot 18 is almost like 7.5 acre lot that's used for separation and buffering and visually screening. I believe we can mitigate the visual screening, so that aside, I think it's very compatible, and I felt confident when I addressed the requisite standards, which I will also have to testify to at the zoning board, that we satisfy them.
Okay.
Oh, and as for the one-dimensional variance, once again, I argue that like a waiver. Certain waivers that we ask of boards and commissions for subdivisions and/or land developments, quite often, those waivers are appropriate because they end up with a better product. Clearly, this variance, because we could build it in accordance with the regulations, but it ends up with a better product. So I think that's an appropriate
Which variance are you talking about?
It's supposed to be the 100-foot setback off the Lot 18, we have a 50-foot. We're pushing it towards our adjoining lot, that's part of the application.
Right, okay,
That was
Thank
a recommendation of the board.
right. Okay. Anything else related to?
One
zoning
statement
boards.
that just bothers me, and take no offense, but it's a recommendation of some of the members of this board, because at that meeting, there were also members of this board that said, just comply with the zoning regulations as well. So we were kind of a divided board on that issue.
Anything else? Okay. Item 3, so there will be no significant negative environmental impacts from the proposed development as shown in the final plan, with all required conditions for approval. Comments on that?
I think what Mr. Keene has said about the fragmentation of the forest, that's going to be, that's an issue. And I don't think that needs to be explained any further.
Others? Discussion on that? Okay. Mr. Keen?
Yes, and I thank Mr. Pimentel for pointing out that until we consider regulations or, changes to the regulations, this opens the door for endless, maybe this, I hope this isn't appropriate, but we'll keep getting solar projects.
Right.
Until, unless, because we won't, unless we do that, we won't ever achieve our fair share of solar.
I'm clearly a proponent of solar,
Yeah,
but I'm also an urban planner, and I respect, and I've been a continuous urban planner for 35 years, continuously working for all cities and towns. And I respect the regulatory process. It's the will of the people. And if people say, look,
Right.
we think potentially maybe this is not what we thought it was gonna be the vision, then you can change your regulations, right, as you indicate. Or you can alter the regulations, say, maybe if we rethink this, the massing scale of it, the locations of them, I mean, there's a whole multitude of things you can do. I don't think solar is inappropriate. I know a lot of people are offended by it. I support that right now. If you want to rethink that in the future, there are ways of communities that have done that, but right now, yeah.
And I just want to point out, I am not an opponent of solar energy or renewable energy. I'm a.
I said, it's true. You know what else the zoning does? It imparts power.
It certainly does.
You go to the zoning code, says, I'm entitled to this, I should be able to do this.
Right.
So it curtails and it imparts.
Right. Yeah, and I want to second what Mr. Keene said, is the explanation was good, because in this process, actually, you know, there is the difference between the comprehensive plan and the ordinances. The comprehensive plan presents a vision for the town. I don't even want to call it a blueprint, because blueprints are very specific. It's really a vision, stated goals, desires, and to give a feeling for where we want to go as a town. And then the ordinances are put in place to shape that. That's the specifics. And we don't have jurisdiction over the ordinances. We certainly have an influence on them. We've been part of writing them, modifying them, particularly the second round with the solar. And then we can make what I hope is a valued recommendation when things go to the zoning board, but we don't have yea or nay say on it. And that's important for us all to understand, is that there's the comprehensive plan, and that's sort of ours, and then there's how we communicate with the zoning.
There was real insight when the state legislature established the regulatory process for these things. A zoning board has no input into the crafting of the authoring of the zoning ordinance, right?
Right.
Either a private party puts forth a regulation, or a council person sponsors and suggests something, right? Staff helps to write it. It has to, by law, go through the planning board process for public input, for recommendations, maybe redrafting it, and then it goes on to the council. Why? Because the planning board is the one who's the curator of the comprehensive plan.
Right.
We'll want to make sure that the zoning code follows and helps to effectuate these goals and these very broad-based goals,
Exactly.
objectives, and missions.
Right. So with that, item 4, the subdivision this is the wording of the way the law is written. Subdivision as proposed will not result in the creation of individual lots with any physical constraints to develop that building on those lots according to pertinent regulation and building standards would be impracticable. Lots with physical constraints to development may be created only if identified as permanent open space or permanently reserved for a public purpose on the approved recorded plans. So, does this one apply? I'm not,
Mr. Chairman, they're not creating any lots. The lots
That's
are
right, they're not creating
pre-existing,
any
so
lots.
that, they would meet that threshold.
right. Mr. Igliozzi, with that, you just chime in on that one?
I agree.
Okay.
This is a definitional requirement, and it doesn't apply in
It's
this
not
case.
applicable here, and therefore it meets it, okay. Thanks. Number 5, all proposed land developments in all subdivision lots have adequate and permanent physical access to a public street. Lot frontage on a public street without physical access shall not be considered in compliance with this requirement. So, and in this case, we do have a landlocked, although with a landlocked acreage, but with an easement either to be put in place or already in place, or it's already in place, okay. So, Mr. Leo, does that meet the requirement?
I think it's intended, it doesn't require that they own the land, the easement is a
Okay.
legal right, it gets recorded. I think that satisfies. as
So,
long as you have physical access to a public street.
and not necessarily in perpetuity.
Well, an easement, unless they tell us otherwise, runs with the land in perpetuity, unless there's some limit. You could certainly, you could speak.
That runs with the land of a particular term in excess of the life of the.
As long as the easement exists, as long as the project,
okay.
that's
Okay, yeah, sort of
legally
like
acceptable.
the 99-year lease, and, down for the marina in Portsmouth and all that kind of stuff, yeah, got it. Okay. I think that's actually how a lot of our bike paths are working with the railroads, right? Yeah. Okay, and then, except for administrative subdivisions, findings of fact must be supported by legally competent evidence on the record which discloses the nature and character of the observations upon which the fact finders acted. So, and that's just getting back to, in support of arguments yea or nay, we have to have factual findings, so, all right. So with that, we have two items on the agenda today. One is to vote on the approval of the master plan, and the other is, if approved, to make a recommendation to the zoning board. Okay. Are we ready to do that, or is there any further discussion? Corey? Okay, I'll look for a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll move that. Thank you. I'll move that we approve the master plan
Actually, should we read from the planner's notes?
Okay.
The planner's notes has, I think didn't you write up a recommendation for approval?
With the stipulations.
Yes, with stipulations, et cetera.
Mr. Chairman, I think if the board, again, it's up to the board. The board, because the planner took the time to reduce that into writing, if you want to make the motion and incorporate the planner's comments, assuming you want to incorporate the planner's comments and conditions, make that part of your motion. You don't need to recite.
Oh, we can just refer to it?
And
Okay,
incorporate it into the motion.
thank you.
So I'll do that. I'll move that we approve the master plan in accordance with the planner's stated written recommendation. But, and
Yeah.
conditions.
Okay, Great.
But I would like to have discussion or clarification before we vote, if that's, or is this the time to do it?
no, we can do the motion, we can do,
Okay, I'll
do
make
a
the-
second.
I'll make the motion.
Great, we have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second for Mr. Punchak, now further discussion.
Okay, so, I made the motion, but I still feel very strongly about the forest defragmentation. And I just want to say, before the vote gets to me, that I am going to vote against it, and solely for that reason. I like, other than that, I like your project. If it was in a different place, I would vote for it wholeheartedly. But I have significant concerns about what's left of our contiguous forests, and I'm just trying to preserve it.
Okay, Mr. Keen, any other discussion? Hearing that, we'll have a roll call vote. Mr. Fournier?
No.
Mr. Punchak?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
No.
Mr. Keen?
No.
Chair votes yes. Okay, so with that, the master plan approval was denied, in which case we don't need to vote on the zoning board. Mr. Igliozzi, did you have a?
I think you're right. I think technically you're correct, but I think for the record, you might want to put your recommendation, what your recommendation would be.
Okay,
Because there is going to be an appeal from this body to the zoning board as the
Okay.
next step.
okay,
And that, there's
That's
two
fine.
aspects, right? There'll be an appeal. If you want to
Okay.
wait till that appeal, you could stop now.
I don't know, I think the board could make that vote now, sure. Any further discussion on the zoning? Is it stuff, okay, so I'll look for look for a motion on our, what recommendation to make.
I just want to clarify one issue, that the
Certainly.
expert's report was made part of the record. I just wanted to-
I'm sorry. Yeah. Sorry, the other way.
Thomas Carlotta for the applicant. I just want to make clear that we did provide the report, and I want to make sure that it's, that it is part of the record today,
That is part, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
as well as his resume, that's all.
yes,
Thank you so much.
thanks. Okay. So we need a motion on what recommendation to make to the zoning board?
But as I sit here now, I would withhold, because we don't know what's gonna happen at the zoning board when they sit in their capacity as the Board of Appeals. If they were to reverse this board, then it comes back here for the next step. That's what
Oh.
would happen.
Okay. So does essentially restart or bring us
No,
back to master plan?
No, what
No,
would
no.
happen would be preliminary plan.
Yeah, so,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if you deny the master plan, they appeal to zoning, zoning reverses your decision, it'll come back here for preliminary.
Right.
Preliminary.
And we're not making a we're not making a recommendation on the appeal right now. We'd be making a premature recommendation
It
on the,
seems that way.
Okay.
It's kind of, it seems to me that the zoning board is not going to hear the issues on the variances. Now, I think if it were to be reversed, then I would ask this board to take that up, and before the zoning board acts on the variances, because they can't come back to preliminary until after the variances.
right.
I would assume the zoning board would provide direction at that point. If they reverse the decision, it would be remanded back here.
Only for
For a recommendation,
Only for recommendation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay,
Not the master plan.
gotcha.
Wasn't the recommendation somewhat made by default by the vote?
It was, except that I do think that it's two separate pieces. The recommendation on what the zoning board does with regard to the zoning variances is a function that this board has that's a separate, distinct function from analyzing the regulations of the application. So I think, as I sit here now, what would happen is, let's think this out, if the zoning board sustains your decision, then the answer is no, unless they go to Superior Court. If they overturn your decision, before the zoning board, before they can come back here for preliminary, they gotta go to the zoning board for variances. And that'll give this board time to make recommendation on those variances. But you're right, obviously, the intent and your concerns are being raised by implication, but I would think that that would be a process and a function you would still exercise.
Right.
It doesn't require a public hearing, a public meeting, but not a public hearing. You just make a recommendation on the zone.
Right, okay.
Mr. Solicitor, do those stipulations that are outlined, if the zoning board remands it back here, do those stipulations now not exist?
It'll be up to the zoning board. If they reverse your
Yes.
decision,
Okay.
whether or not they're going to incorporate some or all of those stipulations. The recommendations of the planner were for a positive vote of approval,
Sure.
and that was denied. So if it's, could the zoning board adopt all those? The answer is yes, and, you know, we can't speak for what they might do. And I'm calling the zoning board, but they'll be sitting in their capacity as a Board of Appeals, not a zoning
Right.
board. Yes, I'm sorry.
So if they reverse your decision, it will come back here for your recommendation, because in the ordinance, you are required to make a recommendation to them. At that point, if your recommendation on the variance request will be what it'll be, you could also, I believe, attach stipulations to that, or forward those stipulations as a recommendation to the board to impose those stipulations on any decision that they make.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, I guess the item is complete. Thank you all for your time. Okay, let me get back to the agenda. Okay, item 8.
we're gonna save you the hassle and just make a motion to adjourn?
Is that it?
Yeah.
I guess it is.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?